Hey everybody, Paige here. I'm going to take a little break from listing Magic cards on eBay to look at my favorite commander deck, which is Norin the Wary. This is the deck that a lot of people don't understand, they don't know how to play against it, and it can often draw a lot more hate in reference to how good the deck actually is. Okay, first let's take a look at our main card, Norin the Wary. When a player plays a spell or a creature attacks, remove Norin the Wary from the game. Return it to play under the ender's control the end of turn. Under the owner's control, not under ender's control. Norin says, I have a bad feeling about this. So basically, the basic part of the basic combo of this is that Norin comes into play and triggers enter the battlefield effects. There's actually only a few cards that Norin combos with in the deck, but the ones that he does combo with, he combos with very well. I have Norin in this super hard case for two reasons. Oh, and Norin is foil, of course. Almost this entire deck is foil. That was a very expensive thing to do, by the way. I only did it because after some years back, I was a product buyer at the collector store, still wearing their shirt now. Go there, great store. Order your boxes from them online. I don't sell boxes anyway. And I had to leave there when I lost a leg, and I went into eBay selling on my own at home here. And I decided to cut my Magic collection down, and I was just going to play one deck. I was just going to play Norin. So I foiled Norin out almost completely. There's only maybe two cards in it right now that foil versions exist that I don't have. One of which is, well, we'll look at them when we get to them. But Norin here is foil. He's in a hard case for two reasons, because I am always having to hand him off to other people, and he never gets shuffled in the deck, and because I also, after years of looking, found a French version of Norin, you know, for the horrible joke that the French run away from everything. Okay, now that we've looked at Norin, let's look at the main cards that Norin combos with. First off, Purphoros, God of the Forge. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Purphoros deals 2 damage to each opponent. Now, Norin's going to trigger this not only on your turn, he's going to trigger it on each one of your opponent's turns under most circumstances. Now, most opponents are going to think that this is the win condition, and they're going to try their best to remove it eventually. Purphoros rarely actually wins the game. It does draw out removal. It will take people's life totals down. It'll win the game in combination with other cards, but by itself it usually doesn't win. Then Impact Tremors, just a lesser version of Purphoros. Pandemonium, a more dangerous version of Purphoros because your opponents get it as well. But you can also use this for spot removal. I only play Pandemonium when I'm at the point where I can ping somebody out of the game. Otherwise, it'll just end up with me losing all of my creatures other than Norin. Norin usually sticks around. Alright, let's take a look at the mana base. Nick those Shrine to Nyx, great in any deck that is monocolored. See these little dots here on my cards? You're going to see that on a lot of the better generic cards. Those dots are on the inner sleeve. That's because this deck used to share some of these cards with other decks, and the dots made it very easy to just shuffle those cards right on out and put them in the other deck they go in. Scrying Sheets looks for snowlands. This is pretty decent because most of the lands in this deck are snow. However, if you've got Sense Ice Top Out, you can manipulate the top of your deck and make sure it is always snow. So I don't use that ability much unless I have Sense Ice Top Out or if I just have mana to burn. Thawing Glaciers, Judge Foil, stupidly expensive. One of the only reserve list cards that has a foil version. One of the other ones is Wheel of Fortune. If you got this in your opening hand, you're gonna, for the most part, get your land drops, because that can be a problem in this deck. Maze of Ith, you just put this out, and chances are nobody's ever going to swing their big creature at you, because it's just a waste. Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle. Whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, if you control at least 5 of the mountains, you may have Valakut, Lightning Bolt, target creature or player. This is good in in games that go long. Dwarven Mine, if I have 3 or more mountains, I get a dwarf token. It doesn't come up very often, but I have blocked with the dwarf token before to keep from losing the game, so it stays in. Keep, much the same thing as Dwarven Mine. You know, makes mana. I can get a kobold. That kobold can block. Now the rest of the lands are foil snow-covered mountains. Got a full art one here. Cold Snap. And what I'm trying to fill the deck with, that are very hard to find, are Montana and Nevada, the Spanish snow-covered mountain. They're not particularly valuable, but they're very difficult to find because Spanish cards almost never get put up on the market. From what I understand, players in Spain prefer vintage, so they're not all that into Spanish cards. So I think most Spanish cards go to South America, where the people who get them just don't put them on the internet to sell them. So if you have any of these, you want to send me some of these, that would be great. Otherwise, I just have to try to collect them as they pop up on TCG Player every once in a while. And then, you know, just more snow-covered mountains. We don't need to look at them. There's a bunch of them. All foil, of course. Now, red has a card draw problem. That's why we play some wheels. We play a revised Wheel of Fortune. Most expensive card in the deck, although I paid $13 for it when I first built the deck. Got it way before the price went up. And this card also seems to be cursed. I can play 10, 15 games without seeing this card come up. Oh, and Wheel is one of the, I think the only card, one of 2 cards in the deck that I don't have the foil version of. There's a Judge foil of Wheel of Fortune, but it was already $1,000 when I started foiling the deck, and I just couldn't make myself do it. It's probably $2,000 now, so I probably should have did it. Magus of the Wheel just does the wheel. Reforge the Soul, a Miracle Wheel. Winds of Change. I love to play Winds of Change on turn 1. If I get a starting hand with Winds of Change and a mountain, snow-covered mountain, I play the snow-covered mountain and I play Winds of Change. Not even caring what I get, because it does a couple of things. All those mulligans people did, gone. They're just going to get whatever they draw. That guy you don't really know is actually cheated his opening hand, gone. Alright, look at the artifacts. Ruby Medallion, there is no foil of Ruby Medallion. Makes your red spells cheaper. Genesis Chamber, this is one of the things that Norin triggers. You put this out, you're gonna get a mirror token pretty much on your turn and everybody else's turn. Tome of Legends. This card normally isn't that good. Whenever your commander enters the battlefield or attack, put a page counter on it, and you can remove a page counter to draw a card. But Norin enters the battlefield constantly. So this is going to, and since I have no way to force this to untap during a turn, this essentially has unlimited counters on it by the time I can even use it. Tangle Wire. Beginning of each player's upkeep, that player taps an untapped artifact, creature, or land they control for each fade counter on Tangle Wire. This works good with Norin because you can tap Norin and the Tangle Wire, so it only ever hits you for one card, one time. Especially if you can drop this turn 3, it slows the other players who have better card draw and better acceleration from pulling ahead of you. Or even better, it slows them down for a turn and then somebody wastes removal on it. Grafted Skullcaps, 7th edition foil. Beginning your draw step, draw a card. At the end of the turn, discard your hand. This would be bad in most decks, but Norin tends to run out of cards entirely. So I'm perfectly okay drawing 2 cards a turn and playing both of them. Mind's Eye, whenever an opponent draws a card, I can pay 1 and draw a card as well. Works in anything. Burnished Heart. My particular play group really has a thing for Burnished Hearts, even though they're not that great. My friend Steve and I competed over who could get the most exotic Burnished Heart. I managed to get a Russian one and a foil one, and he had a foil one. Then he beat me and managed to get a foil Russian one. So, Steve, you have the best Burnished Heart. Teferi's Puzzle Box. Beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts the cards in their hand on the bottom of their library and draws that many cards. This drives a lot of players absolutely nuts. And in case of Norin, I don't care what I get. Looks like an 8th edition foil, but it has that terrible little reprint thing in the corner that makes it worthless. You know, the Chronicles 2.0, that's what this is. It might be worth something later, and maybe I'll buy the 8th edition foil later, but for now, my only requirement was to foil the whole deck, not that it was the most expensive foil. Cage Sun, always good in mono, creatures get +1/+1, and whenever land's ability adds the mana, I get an additional mana. Only bad thing about this is I have trouble getting to 6 in the first place. Good old foil Soul Ring. Soul Ring's in almost every deck. Gauntlet of Power. Extra, much like the Cage Sun. Works great. Does help your opponents if they're playing red. Now, the only thing I'm missing is the Gauntlet of Might. The Gauntlet of Might is in the world's best Norin list, but Gauntlet of Might was one of those rares that stopped in Unlimited, and it was just already out of the price range I was willing to pay. So I never got one. Memory Jar. Temporary Wheel of Fortune. If I'm out of cards, I'll sacrifice the Memory Jar and draw some cards and play them. Sin size top, doesn't need a lot of explanation. Mind Stone, acceleration, draw a card. Panharmonicon. Drop this down with Perforos, and suddenly Norin's dealing 4 damage every time. Or if I'm getting mirrors from Norin, suddenly I'm getting 2 mirrors every time. And once we get to my other creatures, a lot of them have entered the battlefield effects as well. That's actually a more dangerous thing than Perforos, but most people waste their removal on Perforos instead of Panharmonicon. Expedition Map, search my library for a land card. Usually going to be Nykthos. Put it in my hand and shuffle my library. Gilded Lotus, big fancy expensive Soul Ring. Extra Planar Lens, this is why all the lands are foil. I mean not foil, it's why all the lands are snow covered. You imprint a snow covered land, and then when I tap them, I get double mana, and my opponents probably don't have any snow-covered mountains, so they get none. Duplicant I use more for removal than I actually care about making a big creature. Mana Vault, the other card that there's a foil version of, they just keep making foil versions of Mana Vault, so I'm just kind of waiting for the right time for them to make another foil version and one of them to be cheaper, and then I'll foil Mana Vault. Conjurer's Closet. The end step, exile target creature you control, return it to the battlefield under your control. This works with pretty much everything but Norin, and since a lot of my other creatures have enter the battlefield effects, works great. Okay, a few utility things. Smash to smithereens, destroy artifact, deal 3 damage. I like this one because this is an artist proof, so there's only 50 of this card in the world. See, the back is blank. Not technically legal if you're in a DCI sanctioned tournament, you know, as for all those Commander DCI sanctioned tournaments. Otherwise, it is legal because the only thing that requires the card to have a standard magic back is the DCI floor rules. It's not in the magic rules. It's in the DCI floor rules. Chaos Warp, what a red's better removal thing. And you can do it to yourself if you want to save something or tutor something out, or there's nothing worth removing and you got the mana. Gamble. Find a win condition. Or find a Wheel of Fortune. Chandra. This Chandra wheels me, does me a mini wheel, or I can make elemental tokens to trigger Perforos. Or I guess I could also use the rarely lose X damage to each creature, but I almost never use that. Chandra Ablaze. Chandra can wheel everybody to 3 cards. And that's usually the only ability I use on Chandra Ablaze. Okay. Outpost Siege. This is great in Norin because I can either choose to use it as a form of card draw by choosing cons, because red is not good at card draw, or I can use it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player whenever a creature I control leaves the battlefield. I used to always pick dragons because Norin was always leaving the battlefield, but as more and more time went on, I was picking cons more and more often because the card draw seemed to be better than picking 1 person or creature to deal 1 damage to and then annoying that player without making huge progress towards winning. Experimental Frenzy. And look at the top card of my library. I can play it, but I can't play cards from my hand. It's a great one to play when I run the handout. Then I can just play everything off the top of my deck until I run out of mana. When I end up with a full hand, then I'll destroy the Experimental Frenzy. Confusion in the ranks. This is one of the major win conditions. Whenever an artifact, creature, or enchantment comes into play, its controller chooses target permanent another player controls that shares a type with it. Exchange control of those permanents. What makes this great is that Norin comes in, gets you one of the other person's creatures, then next time something happens, he's going to blink away, and he's going to come back to you. So, you pretty much, when this resolves, if the people can't take care of it in a few turns, you win the game. Often people concede as soon as I play it. Warp World. Each player shuffles all permanents they own into their library and reveals that top decks that many, and they put all the artifact, creatures, or lands into play, and then the enchantments. This is good in Norin for 2 reasons, because sometimes Norin will make a bunch of tokens, and secondly, this deck has over 90 permanents in it. There are very, very few cards in this deck that aren't permanents. I think it's got 94 permanents, 93, something like that. Warstorm Surge. Oh, I missed that. That should have been near the beginning. Another variant of Perforos for Norin to just keep dealing damage to things as he comes in. Blood Moon. I'm okay if all my lands are mountains. Other people, not so much. Utility creatures. Ogre Battle Driver. This is great, not so much for the hasting action or even attacking, but if you've got creatures dealing damage based on their power when they come in, that makes that power 2 higher. And if you do have a bunch of creatures coming in to actually attack, that's useful as well. Imperial Recruiter. Imperial Recruiter looks for various things. I'll often look for Mod Catcher or Kiki Jiki or something else that's going to help me win the game. Magus of the Moon. If it's worth having 1 Blood Moon, it's worth having 2. Especially when one of them can block. Harsh Mentor. Whenever opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature, or land, if it is a mana ability, Harsh Mentor deals 2 damage to that player. This either does not much anything, or it really hurts somebody, or it causes somebody to waste removal on it. Zealous Conscripts. Now this will combo with Kiki Jiki to win the game as soon as you attack. Or you can just use it to do what's on the box if Kiki Jiki's not there. Gain control of target permanent until end of turn, untap it, and give it haste. Alright, now my Norin deck is Goblin based, so now we're going to get into the Goblins. There are several other Norin decks you can build that will use few or no Goblins, but this is a Goblin based Norin deck. Mod Catcher is not a Goblin, but Mod Catcher tutors Goblins to the battlefield. Muxus. Top deck your top 6 cards. All the Goblin cards of mana cost 5 or less, which is almost every Goblin card in my deck, goes on the battlefield. The rest go on the bottom. Now, you can utilize this with other cards to stack your deck before Muxus comes out, so you can for sure just place 6 Goblins. Goblin Marshal, I think that's the only one that doesn't work with Muxus, but got Perforos out. Goblin Marshal comes into play along with 2 Goblins, dealing 6 damage to everybody. Then when you don't pay the Echo cost, it's going to deal 6 more damage to everybody. So that's 12 damage overall for Goblin Marshal happening to every player other than you. Goblin Matron, look for a Goblin card. Put it in your hand. Goblin War Chief, if I'm actually having to pay to cast the Goblin cards, I might as well make it cheaper. Goblin Ringleader. Now, if I'm getting to stack the deck of the Goblins, I will often, to make 6 of them come out onto the battlefield, I will often put Goblin Ringleader 6th, then 4 more Goblins after that to go into my hand. Because you reveal top 4 cards of your library and put the Goblins into your hand. Goblin Rune Blaster. Kick it and destroy land. Goblin Wizard from the Dark. Take Goblins right out of your hand and gain Goblins protection from white. Goblin Settler, a stupidly expensive card because it was only in Starter 99. When it comes into play, destroy target land. Which is okay on its own, but if you're able to blink it every turn with Conjurer's Closet, you're destroying a land every single turn. Goblin Chieftain. If I'm going to have a bunch of Goblins, they might as well have +1 and +1 in haste. Goblin Recruiter. No foil of this that I'm aware of, unless they've been one in the last few months. Search your library for a number of Goblin cards, reveal them, and put them on top of your library in any order, so you stack your deck, hopefully into a win. Tuk Tuk Scrapper. Destroy target. When him or another ally enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact. And deal damage equal to its number of allies that I control, which is usually just 1. Goblin Assassin. Goblin Assassin, once he comes out, it just starts the battlefield being emptied of any creatures that aren't goblins, or that aren't mine. Goblin Lackey, a great opening hand card. Whenever he deals damage to a player, put a goblin from my hand onto the battlefield. So play him turn 1, turn 2 he attacks, and then places Kiki Jiki or something else great. Kiki Jiki, combos with Zealous Conscripts to just win the game, or I can copy anything else I want to. Sometimes I copy Mod Catchers to tutor out more goblins. Goblin Welder. This deck has a lot of artifacts in it that I can weld around to my advantage or disadvantage if I'm choosing poorly, or I can also use it to get a good artifact off an opponent's board to trade for something that they sacrificed earlier. Goblin Chainwhirler. It's just a good card, and it can knock it. If somebody's got a bunch of tokens, it can just knock them out. Also, it builds a lot of devotion for Nykthos. Warren Instigator. Now, if dealing damage and putting one goblin out is good, then dealing damage and putting out 2 is better. Goblin King. Goblins get +1/+1 and have Mountain Walk. Mountain Walk has won many games for me when I'm actually winning with the attack. Krenko Mob Boss. You don't even if you're playing right and you're lucky, you don't even have to attack with all these goblins. If you've got Perforos or something else out, and he sticks around for a couple of turns, you've just done enough damage to everybody to win the game. Siege Gang Commander. When it enters, creates 3 1/1 red goblin tokens. You've got Perforos out, he's going to enter the battlefield and do 8 damage to everybody right off the bat. And also the sacrificing a goblin, if you've got the mana, you can finish people off with it. And didn't leave a great one for the last one, but good old Mog War Marshal. Enters the battlefield or dies, gets a goblin, so you're going to have 3 goblins altogether, but you're going to trigger Perforos 3 times total off this card, which is going to deal 6 damage to everybody. Well, that's it. That's Norin the Wary, my favorite commander deck. Soon I'm going to start building a different Norin the Wary deck that barely uses any goblins, more of a Norin prison deck. I'll put that up when I get it. If you've got a Norin deck, I'd love to hear about it. Post about it in the comments.